MouseKast, where the mind meets the magic. This week we have an amazing show. To miss it would be tragic. This is where the mind meets the magic. Every path we tread brings tips and tricks, from theme park thrills to the open sea. MouseKast podcast keeps you company. Tonight we talk with Dr. Disneyland and his lovely wife, who is quite grand. The wisdom of Walt and Mary's life, Disney's past and what is planned. So buckle up and listen in, as we never know where this could go. With Jeff and Lyndsey here, it's bound to be an amazing show. Let's talk some wisdom of Walt, a little motivation, positivity. Let's talk about married couples and how fun those theme parks seem to be. This is where the mind meets the magic. Every path we tread brings tips and tricks, from theme park thrills to the open sea. MouseKast podcast keeps you company.
Hello and welcome to MouseKast, the podcast where the mind meets the magic. This is episode 60, and we have an incredibly amazing special show for you tonight. So we're going to jump right in. I want to say a huge thanks to all of the co-hosts who are joining us tonight: Hawk, Anne Marie, Megan, Ty, Matt, Natalie, and Mike. And most importantly, we have our special guests tonight. Hawk, would you like to introduce our very special folks?
We do. Visiting from the other coast. I believe you guys are home, correct? All right. So from the other coast, we have the amazing Dr. Disneyland himself, Jeff Barnes, and his lovely wife is actually joining us. And we are going to be discussing all kinds of topics tonight, including Jeff's claim to fame, his book, also some new projects and some very exciting news. And of course, the lovely Lyndsey is here. We're going to be talking a little bit about the new marriage and some of the projects that have come out of that marriage. And we're going to have an exciting chat tonight. We're all looking very forward to spending some time with you and learning some lessons through the wisdom of Walt and the wisdom of your lovely wife and yourself, Dr. Disneyland. So we look forward to jumping right in. Want to thank you for joining us too, first and foremost.
Well, thank you for having us. Honor and privilege, of course. And happy February, everyone. Happy Valentine's Day. I know that was a couple of days ago, but February is the month of love, right? And hopefully you're celebrating all month long.
That is a very valid point. Very valid point. I know Chuck also has some questions lined up. Megan has a couple. We've also kind of sampled the cast to get a few questions we can get in. Chuck, why don't you lead us off with a question tonight? I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, well, sure. Of course. And again, Jeff, thank you so much for being with us. And I think probably the best place to start is that you do have, as Hawk mentioned, some new projects. Why don't you share with us some of the new things that are soon to come to our bookshelves and beyond?
Well, thank you. Appreciate you asking that question. Two projects actually three projects that we're super excited about. One is I continue to write every Wednesday, my weekly Wednesdays with Walt blog, and that is going to be coming in a compilation to bookstores soon. I'm putting the best 52 together, which is very convenient because the reason it comes out on Wednesdays is because Imagineering started out as WED, and of course Wednesday starts with WED, and WED began in 1952. There's 52 Wednesdays in a year. They say when you're an author, it's better to be clear than clever. I like being clever, so I just can't help myself. And then secondly, Lyndsey and I have a YouTube channel that we started late last year, Jeff and Lyndsey Barnes, where we talk about relationships. We talk about our story. We talk about the reality of the age gap, and we're having a lot of fun with that. And born out of the YouTube channel is, and I think probably this is what we're most excited about, we are writing together a Disney-inspired relationship book.
I tell you what, and that's going to be pretty cool. There was something interesting in kind of talking along those lines. You had several posts that you put out on social media recently, especially related to Valentine's Day, and there was one that you talked about that really kind of got to me, and this goes towards some of the relationship book as well as your Wed or Wednesday post as well. You mentioned something here, and I loved this. You said in a post, Disney is evolving because we have evolved. The way we read, the way we shop, the way we experience theme parks, it's all shifting. And while nostalgia tugs at our hearts, we have to ask, do we want things to stay the same, or do we want them to stay relevant? That got me to this concept of, for those who are in the big Star Wars fans, we hear all the time about from a certain point of view that Obi-Wan talks about when not revealing certain pieces to Luke Skywalker. The certain point of view that you both have. So my question, I guess, is how did your individual backgrounds create your own point of view? And then now that, of course, you are married in one couple, how has that changed and developed your kind of joint point of view, especially when it comes to relationships, when it comes to Disney?
Wow, that is a deep question, and one that could probably take an entire book to answer. I think what really brought us together, other than the story of how we met and the story of how we connected, is that we both care a lot for each other. And Lyndsey really wanted to make sure I got taken care of. I wanted to make sure Lyndsey got taken care of. And once we realized that we could trust each other on that level, everything else really sort of took care of itself. And I was struck yesterday. I had the opportunity to give a lecture on the history of Valentine's Day, which is fascinating, by the way. I gave a lecture on the history of Valentine's Day to seniors at an assisted living care facility. And this prompted a conversation around, how did you meet your spouse? And, how long have you, or in most instances, were you together? Because a lot of these folks, unfortunately, are widowed. And there were stories in the room of people who had met in high school and were married 60, 65, going on 70 years. And to a person, they would say it was as if they had met yesterday. And, their spouse had been gone 5 years, 8 years, 15 years. And it's just as hard today as it was the day that they passed. And what gets them through the pain of each and every day are the memories and the adventures and the experiences that they share together. And so for Lyndsey and me, when we first started hanging out together 3 years ago, yeah, we wanted to take care of each other, but we took care of each other through shared experiences, and that started with Disney. I tend to be the talker in the relationship, so I'm going to shut up and let her say something here.
Well, I think just building off of what you said, we would go to Disneyland together, and I would do things as simple as carry his water and make sure he had his water, and he would make sure that I had a jacket, and if I was cold, he would give me his jacket, and he'd make sure I had food. And so it was just these little things that kind of built up into one day we're fully taking care of each other, and that care for each other turned into we fell in love.
Yeah, and that looks different today because it's 3 years later and we're married, and there are different levels of commitment, right? Which is part of the evolution and the progression that you're talking about. But at the foundation, you have to, I believe, have that level of care and that level of commitment, and you can't ever let it erode. You can't ever let it wash away, or otherwise you're going to be grasping at something that's almost impossible to get back.
So that brings kind of an interesting transition for me to go into this for you, because as you guys spend time in the parks together, And, Jeff, you and I have talked a little bit in the past that I was my father had a significantly younger wife for a good portion of my childhood. She and I had actually gone to high school at the same time. So like it was an interesting dynamic, but I respect and understand that, love knows no bounds. When you fall in love, it's if it's right, it's right. And like that's something that only you and your partner can share or determine whether it's right or not. But going to the parks the way you do, and again, being an age gap couple, Lyndsey, at your age, you view the theme parks differently and not necessarily with the same history that Jeff does. So what do you learn from each other? Like, Jeff, what have you discovered about Disneyland that Lyndsey has brought to you? And Lyndsey, conversely, what do you feel you've learned or been taught by Jeff just through the generational differences of going to the parks or experiencing the parks?
Great question. And, for me, it's not just that Lyndsey brings a younger perspective, but she also brings a locals perspective. She grew up in Fullerton and, had a pass for most of her youth and could hear the fireworks from Disneyland almost every night from her bedroom window, which I just think is amazing. I think that's just, unbelievable. And at the same time, when it gets to that point in the evening when it's time for the fireworks, she couldn't care less. It's time to go. She's heard them every night for forever.
That's the best time to ride the rides.
Yeah. And so I think everybody brings their own experience, their own history, and their own, value. And, for me, when it comes to her, taking her to Disneyland, what wasn't necessarily special or unique, because she probably can't remember the first time she went to Disneyland. Again, she grew up 5-7 miles away. Watching her cry on Main Street, USA at the Magic Kingdom in Orlando, Florida, 2.5 years ago, you can't pay for that experience. That was freaking awesome.
Okay. What about you?
I'll say, and Lyndsey, what about you? And especially given the fact that you're a digital native, and Jeff, you're not a digital native, but going and touring the parks in that way, though, where Lyndsey, you kind of literally grown up with technology and walking around with a smartphone in your hand, everything like that. And Jeff and those of us that didn't do that, we kind of remember the old days when you would go to the parks and there wasn't all of the personal technology. You were looking around and you were really taking in all the Disney details versus necessarily being drawn to your phone.
That's why when we give tours, I refer to her as logistical Lyndsey, because she's running everything off of the phone while I'm yakking, giving the history, giving the fun facts, giving the trivia.
Yeah. Well, I think my answer will be twofold, and he already kind of hinted at the second part of this answer. But for Disneyland, I, just because of my interests and my age, I hadn't really thought about, everything that would go into making a place like that happen. And so I learned something new from him every single time we're there. Like, people think when we go on tours together, they're like, oh, I bet you're so sick of hearing this.
And she is.
To a certain extent, I will walk away and like go do something else. But when I come back and I hear something, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I never even knew that. And he's constantly pointing things out around the park. Like we just noticed something new today at California Adventure. And that's just like, we still notice those things, and having his perspective, this historical perspective, is really cool. And then for the second answer, I didn't even know what Epcot was before I knew him. And now we've been how many times? We've been to Orlando.
She had never been to Orlando, Florida, and we've been 13 times in the past 2.5 years.
Yeah. So there are just things that I didn't even know and or care about Disney. And I think that that's a lot of me just being a local, like Sorry, he's gonna join in with us. But
That's okay.
I was a local, and so I thought that Disneyland was just, that was just like something that we all do. And Walt Disney World, I didn't even see that as a possibility. I didn't think I would ever go there. So to think that like that almost feels like a local park to us now too is pretty crazy.
So Jeff, kind of veering back towards you teaching in these tours where you're, telling people all about Disney and how it works with your newsletter. What is it that keeps you educating people every week through your newsletter as well? What's the importance of continuing to do that over time? You've got all these other projects going on, but the newsletter just keeps going.
Yeah, it's the monster that constantly has to be fed. And great question, Megan. And what I have found, be obsessed or be average, right? And I'm obsessed in constantly consuming both Disney content and content related to success, leadership, motivation, and inspiration, and figuring out ways to like mold and shape those. So for example, last week I was, all in on a Tony Robbins video series on, how to change your state. And then already I'm working on a 4-part blog series on how Disney and theme parks change your state the exact way that Tony Robbins says that you need to if you want to start feeling better immediately. And I think my real genius, if I have any, and it's extremely limited, but my real genius is I can't see the parks any other way. A lot of folks love Disney, which is great, and it's something that you consume. But for me, it's it's something that points to something bigger and something better, and that is how can I leverage this love and not just take a T-shirt home with me, but take something else that I can use every single day at home, at work, in my relationships. Completely across the board.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned the T-shirts. On a previous recent episode, I happened to mention that I can't turn down a Disney T-shirt. So that's kind of my weakness. So your love for the parks, your love for Disney, but it's not all love. You also talk a lot about how disagreeable Walt is or was, and the importance of that personality of his. So I have kind of a double-edged sword. One, if somebody could learn one thing from disagreeable Walt, what would that one thing be that you would want them to know or learn from him?
Have the courage to be weird and crazy, carve your own path, and own your ideas. And the two examples of that, which I talk about almost ad nauseum. One, when Walt had this crazy idea for an amusement park where parents and children could have fun together, he sends the early WED employees, Imagineers, if you will, to an amusement park convention in Chicago in 1952. They lay out Walt's designs, and to a person, the experts in the industry hate it. And they give a million reasons for why this is never going to work. And they're terrified to get home and give Walt the bad news. Well, when Walt hears that the experts in the industry hate it, he's thrilled. He's not building another amusement park, right? He's doing something completely new and completely different. Disagreeable Walt is going to disrupt the industry. And then you've experienced this every time you've walked into a Magic Kingdom, but I don't know that you've ever really thought about it. So Main Street USA is a replication, not just of Marceline, Missouri, but let's be honest, it's the idealized version of every Main Street across every small town in the entire United States, right? And so it's comfortable, it's familiar. We love it because we've walked that street in our own town over and over and over again. You know what no other Main Street USA has? A medieval castle at the end.
Oh, but it should.
And a train station on the other side. Yeah.
Yeah. and we can't get down there fast enough.
Yeah.
Right. And so Walt owned this idea of completely disrupting the industry. And I'm going to do something familiar, and I'm going to stick a castle at the end, and it's going to be freaking awesome, and it's going to be freaking compelling.
So then last one for me, and then I'll let Chuck and Hawk step back in here. Sticking with disagreeable Walt, if he were to see the last quarter century, the last 25 years of his company, what would disagreeable Walt say about some of the decisions that are made in the parks, with the movies, all of the company?
Woo! I think there are pieces and parts of it that he would love. So, for example, I'm going to go with Shanghai. The second they opened Shanghai, and this is a Marty Sklar quote, the sun never sets on a Disney park anywhere in the world. You know, for an enterprise that everybody believed would be bankrupt, shuttered, and forgotten in 6 months or less, to include his own wife and his own brother. And now we live in a world where the sun never sets on a Disney park. I mean, Walt would be thrilled to no end. Or even a world where, you know, Hurricane Milton comes through and Walt Disney World shuts down for a day and they lose $80 million. I mean, how could you not be thrilled by that? How could you not be like, told you, I was right? I mean, that is massive validation. Now, having said that, you know, there are things that I have no doubt he would have done very differently. For example, I will not ride a bus at Walt Disney World. I absolutely refuse, because I know that he would have put a people mover, a monorail, a Skyliner everywhere. And the last thing he would have done is built that damn bus system. And so out of honor and tribute, I will not do it. It's my own personal protest. I think secondly, and this may even be more obvious, Walt hated sequels. He never wanted to repeat himself. And so the fact that, you know, we're up to what, Toy Story 5, you know, he would have a real issue with that. And I get it. You know, they're cash cows, and the studio is there obviously to make money. And, you know, and this is part of the reason why Walt built Disneyland. He wanted to get away from, you know, the corporate entity that the studio had become. He hated that they had to answer to the stockholders after they became a publicly traded company. He wanted to go back, you know, to the Snow White sandbox days. And that's what WED and Disneyland gave him. And I think to some degree, and we see fans complain about this all the time, right? But we're part of the problem. And what I mean by that is we complain about it, but then Toy Story 5 opens and we can't get there fast enough. And then a movie which I thought was great, and I'm going to go back, 10, 12 years now, a movie that's new and different and original like Tomorrowland comes out, nobody shows up.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because Tomorrowland, you know, when it comes to Disney movies, maybe it's in my top 10, because one, it embodies what Walt Disney was all about, that
Absolutely.
sense of spirit, adventure, discovery, pushing the envelope, all of that. So, you know, and it's funny, you talk about in the spirit of Tomorrowland. What I'm also wondering, what Tomorrowland did and what Walt Disney pulled off, though, happened with help. And the help was Roy. There was Walt and there was Roy. Can or will or has the Disney company really, are they able to achieve that same concept of success anymore, because you don't have that Walt and Roy dynamic like you used to? I don't know. Can it happen?
I mean, it's interesting because not only did you have it with Walt and Roy, and when I give my keynote speeches, I have a lot of fun saying, you know, if it weren't for Roy, Walt would have bankrupted the company and probably himself over and over and over again. And if it weren't for Walt, Roy would have spent the rest of his life selling vacuum cleaners door to door in Southern California. They needed each other. It was a phenomenal partnership. We get that replicated with Eisner and Wells. And, I'm not saying Eisner was Walt. I'm not saying Wells was Roy. But in terms of the manner in which a partnership works, we see it replicated with those two. And it was absolutely amazing. We forget what dire straits Disney as a company was in, especially the studio, when Eisner and Wells came in 1984. And, how quickly they got things turned around. Yes, with the parks, and then ultimately with the studio. And then tragically, Wells is killed in that helicopter crash on Easter Sunday in 1994. And so we remember the second half of Eisner's reign not nearly as well as we remember the first half. And that's all about poor decisions that Michael Eisner made without having Frank there to keep his worst half at bay. So, will we see that again? I don't know. I think it's pretty miraculous that Disney as a company really caught lightning like that in a bottle, not once, but twice.
That's a great point. You stated in a past episode on one of the podcasts that I was part of that we've interviewed you, and we've also interviewed you on this podcast as well. And if you ever want to reference them, MouseKast, you were on episode 12 here on this one. And we also interviewed you on Sharing the Magic. You were on both episode 4 and episode 43. So you are definitely one of our favorite guests. And we love every opportunity to talk to you. But you stated in one of those episodes that as you began your Wisdom of Walt project, that part of your journey, you wanted to make sure to tell your own stories. And you have always admired Walt through talking to you on his ability to tell the story, to make just amazing storytelling come to life. How has that evolved in your own projects now with Lyndsey? And, what story do you look most forward to now to tell united and share with all of us?
Wow, great question. So the biggest risk I took in writing the Wisdom of Walt, not so much beyond the Wisdom of Walt, because I repeated a formula that I knew would be successful. What was just that, sharing some of my own story. And what I mean by that is I knew there were already Disneyland history books out there. I didn't want to do another one. I didn't know that I could really add to what already existed. I certainly didn't want to do another Disney business book. I had never been in corporate America. And again, I didn't necessarily think I had anything to add to that. I wanted to honor Walt's legacy as a storyteller, his desire to build the park for the purpose of telling stories, and again, use it as a vehicle to share my own story and hopefully inspire the readers with their own story. Well, in the middle of all of that, I had my own, every great story requires conflict, right? We're seeking the happily ever after ending, but unless you have conflict, your story's boring. And so I initially faced the conflict of a life-threatening brain tumor. Then that got repeated in 2020. And the woman that I was married to was cheating on me, and that entire relationship collapsed. And so it's like, well, what the heck am I going to do now? Like, how do you pick yourself up from there? Like you think you're living this life, you think you're living this story, and it turns out to be something completely different, and you have very little say or control over it other than how you respond. And I think what Lyndsey and I want to do, and Lyndsey has some challenges in her own childhood and relationships that she has witnessed. We want to be able to speak into people who have been a part of difficult relationships, have witnessed difficult relationships, and be able to say, look, your story makes you stronger. And, here's what you can do as an individual. Here's what you can do as a couple. And, you can stay strong in your ability to move forward and do what Walt did, and that is be resilient. I'd love to go back to the Lily quote. I never saw Walt beaten at anything. And I said this yesterday in the Valentine's Day lecture. I've never been with anyone who is as normal and as loving and as caring and as grounding as Lyndsey, to the point where it's almost scary, because it's never been a part of my story ever. And it's almost like, what the heck do I do with this?
It's funny you say that, because having lived with my dad and my stepmother and seeing them build their relationship, it was literally the purest love I've ever seen him have for anyone. And he was married 3 times. He is on number 4 now. But the reason his relationship stopped with Karen was that she actually passed away from brain cancer.
Sorry.
And I really connect to you guys and the story you have, because there's a deep emotional connection to it. And it was literally the purest love I'd ever seen my father have. And he really, truly was with her for everything. And they learned what we talked about in the past was the age gap actually created a lot of open honesty on both planes, and just open availability to communication and different perspective and respect. Most of all, there was a mutual rotating respect that, Lyndsey, at your age, you can bring in insight. You can make people think outside the box. Jeff, at your age, you can make the same thing happen. And when you almost don't have the same background, it makes it easier, because you get the ability to understand someone else's thought process. You don't have to be on the same plane. There's a different process, and you have to care enough to want to learn that. And when you do, it's amazing insight, because every day is a new journey.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because there is such a different plane, we don't have the luxury of assuming. And so we're sort of forced to communicate.
And it opens up that box,
Absolutely.
and that creates amazing opportunity in life. And it's really great to see you guys taking this role and this passion for Disney and all the things you've got, and creating such a special communication out to others. I think one of the things that has to happen in our country right now is normalizing what's different is okay. And like, we really need to be able to do that. And I really admire
my castle at the end of the street, by the way.
Yeah, I have no doubt. But that's one of the things I really find amazing. And I really, since interviewing the first time, I had the utmost respect for you, because I love the way your mind works. You think deeply, you go very into the process of the why. You enjoy the story, you enjoy all of that. One of the things, Matt kind of posed a question up, and I'm going to read it for him, but I'll let you answer to Matt. And Matt, if you want to give any follow-up. But I thought this was really interesting. With some of the new projects that Disney is doing, Matt's very interested in your thought on what story does the upcoming Villains Land need to be able to tell for it to be truly successful. Because those Disney fans that are out here, we're super enthralled for it. But this is like one of those make or break moments for Disney, because everybody has craved this. And if they do it wrong, I feel it could be a big fail. But if they do it right, this could be the most incredible thing Disney has done in my adult life, for sure. What do you feel for that?
So we're really looking forward to Villains Land. Do I wish it were its own park? Possibly. I certainly see a place for that. But you know, I go back to what Walt once said. You know, life is filled with light and dark shadows. And the sooner we expose our children to that, the better. And Disney's desire to lean into that more fully than they ever have before, I think is really, really, really positive. And so, you know, this idea, you know, how do you have a hero if you don't have a villain, right? And so, get into the backstory of the villains, get into the, you know, evil, not nefarious motives of these bad guys. Allow us, because you know, as human beings, we're multifaceted, right? I would love to say that I'm all good. I'm not. And so allow me to go into Villains Land and, you know, experience that part of me that, you know, is a little darker.
Spill the tea, Lyndsey. Spill it. Spill it. No. Wait.
You know, and if I'm being 100% honest, and I always find this interesting because we're very much both and not either or people. I think the most important story that Villains Land is going to tell is, how is this going to be the answer to Epic Universe?
I think that's a key one. I think that is a huge point. We've touched on it several times on this show and others, that, you know, Disney really does have to answer Epic Universe. They're going to receive the benefits of Epic Universe just as much as Universal does, because it's going to bring
absolutely
people.
Right. A rising tide lifts all ships, and I think Epic Universe will be the best thing that has happened to Walt Disney World in the past 20 years. And
I agree. It's going to be some crazy few months coming up. But so I have to ask on Matt's behalf, if you each could pick a selected villain for a meet and greet that you would want in there, like, who are each of you taking in Villains Land? Who would be your go-to that you want that meet and greet going on in that portion of the park?
That's a hard question, because we don't like to meet characters at all. So maybe we're the villains. I don't know.
Who would you like to see roaming then? Because I know in Disneyland they roam. So
they do.
Like, yeah. Who would you like to be able to see walking around in the park that you could see and just go, wow, that's making Villains Land just pop? Like, I wish they had more characters in Galaxy's Edge. I wish they had more interaction with the different characters that span the gap instead of trying to stay true to that one very small window of the story. I think they're missing an opportunity to go much bigger. So who would you want to see walking around in Villains Land?
I have two unrealistic ones.
Go for it.
I think that it would be very strange to see like an Ursula like walking around. Like I would be curious to like, how would they do that costume, the makeup, all of that, like the personality. And then one that like wouldn't be able to happen is Scar. I think he's like scary and sly, but he's a lion, so that's not going to happen.
Well, you know, Lyndsey, actually, you know, we were kind of there for you, actually. So for folks, go back and listen to episode 56 here at MouseKast, where we did our Disney Fab 5 about villains, and the cast selected their 5 favorite villains. And then we surprised them and said, okay, guess what? These are your 5 villains that you have to now put into Villains Land. And Matt, I believe it was you, wasn't it, that came up with Ursula's Potion Shop.
Oh,
yeah. So what do you think about that? I mean, Matt came up with that idea, you know, so you could put Ursula, it wouldn't necessarily be a walk around, but you could see an Ursula animatronic, but then it's a store to buy potions, or a drinks store or something along those lines.
Yeah, I can hear her voice now, like echoing through the potion shop, like laughing at you and telling you what you need. I think that'd be really cool. What do you think, Jeffrey Allen?
Oh, I think that'd be amazing. I would love to see Jafar from Aladdin walking around. And I love puns. If we could get a bridge named for Jafar in Villain's Land, a bridge Jafar, that would just be amazing to me.
And that would be perfect because Disney is not above a very just frankly bad pun.
Correct.
Yeah. So Anne-Marie, you had a great question pop up, and what was your question?
So you guys fell in love through Disney, and there's a lot of Disney love couples. Which Disney romantic couple do you guys relate to the most, and why? And which ones do you love the most?
Okay, I'll answer this, and it's going to come off as a very mean answer at first. And
that makes it better.
Yeah. But only like a month and a half into us hanging out with each other, I watched Beauty and the Beast for the first time in many, many years. Mm-hmm. And like, it was that movie that started to piece together what was happening because, Belle's running around and she's like, something's happening. Like, why is he being nice to me? And like, why, like, he's not trying to kill me, and not that Jeffrey would, and not that he's a beast, but
I was about to say, do we have confirmation here that Jeff's a beast?
Yeah, we very much kind of embody each of those characters. Belle, very like free-spirited, like really wants to just help people and do whatever she can. And then Jeffrey, very much the same way. But he can be a little testy sometimes. And so
I'm incredibly grumpy.
Yeah.
And testy. And so the idea that like the beast sort of softens and
because he
cares for her rather than just himself.
Yeah.
Right.
Because he's not truly a beast. He was just, made into a beast. And that, like, Jeffrey's testiness isn't really who he truly is. He actually doesn't even know he's testy most of the time. So yeah, I think it's definitely that movie, the music from it, even the live action one. I think both of us really enjoyed that one too. So do you concur?
I do. And to give you a little more backstory, the very first conversation we ever had was first day of class. And I had decided that we weren't going to be using the textbook that I had put on the syllabus. And I asked, had anybody purchased the textbook? And Lyndsey, being Lyndsey, was the one student out of 60 that had actually done so. And I said, have you opened it yet? And she said, I brought it with me to class today. And my response was, that's not what I asked. Which,
in front of the whole class.
And I'm like, answer the question. Like I didn't ask who brought it. Like, have you opened it?
See, that's very beast behavior. And in my mind, and this can be a relationship lesson, I just assumed that he would figure out that because I had like brought it and I had opened it up and like it was with me, that I must have like cracked open a page. But that was a false assumption.
Men don't read between the lines.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Lyndsey, it's interesting that you say that, because there's a bit here that, and again, I'm going back to one of your social media posts, and I'm going to kind of start with the end. And the end, or at least one of my takeaways from all of this, and I'll get to it in here in a second, was sometimes it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. And you say that the words we choose have the power to change everything. And it's not just the words we choose, meaning the actual words themselves, but it's also the presentation of those words. So kind of elaborate on that, because you talk about how words shape culture, words define us. And as you said, it's the words that have the power to change everything. And, when it came to Walt Disney, he really thought carefully, not only about the words, but also the stories that those words formed and created.
Yeah, and I'm going to share a story about that. We're all familiar with the plaques over the tunnels. Here you leave today and enter a world of, tomorrow fantasy. And, it's 13 words. I don't have them exactly memorized. He was so particular about the exact wording of those plaques that those plaques weren't up on opening day. It took another 2 weeks for him to polish that wording on his desk before those plaques were actually finished. And so this idea that, it's going to be cast members and we're going to be guests and, there's on stage and there's, backstage, all of that was very, very, very intentional. And I'm a wordsmith. I'm very intentional with my words. Where I struggle is I fail to pick up the way those words come across when I'm speaking. And so I can come across quite harsh and quite blunt and quite direct, even though I don't intend to. I forget the the importance of inflection and tone.
My fiance would say I'm very much the same this week. I have struggled with delivery. It is amazing how, as we go through emotions or feel stress or feel anxiety, or sometimes even without emotions, we deliver the wrong way. I think it's dynamic, the two of you and what you're bringing forth with sharing experiences and things with your new channel, with this new happily ever after project that you're working on and collaborating on. At this point, you've been together you met 3 years ago, a little over, and about 3 years and 6 months, if I recall right. It was September.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, yeah, we met, it'll be 4 years ago this September, but we didn't start hanging out together until 3 years ago, January.
Okay, excellent.
Class ended. I left the university and had the accident in Boston. She reached out, and here we are.
Gotcha. What lessons what is the key lesson that you've each taken away from the other as related to your life happiness and just contentment? Like, is there a key thing that you took away that you realized, wow, it just doesn't get any better than this?
For me, that's pretty easy, which has taken me forever to embed. And that is that Lyndsey has my best interest at heart. She cares for me. She loves me. She wants to do what is best for me. And anything she says or does, even if I don't understand it, even if I don't agree with it, it comes from a good place, a good heart, and a good intention.
Wow. That one, I will say now, I'm just going to say, Jen, that's what I've been trying to say all week. And yes, that he is far more eloquent than I am. So please, I'm going to allow you to speak for me tonight, Jeff. Thank you very much, because I've struggled to say those exact things this week.
Well, I'll give you an example. Yeah. So I've had some health issues over the past 4 or 5 weeks. And, I grew up in a family system where if you were sick or God forbid had to go to the hospital, you were in trouble. Like you were a pain in your parents, what. And if I have to take you to the hospital, like you better be like near dead. Because if you're not, I'm going to chew your like you're in the worst trouble imaginable.
Whereas, well, it's interesting because what you're talking about there then, and some of what I'm kind of getting here, it's this idea of trust. And trust is something that has to be earned. It's given to, but it's also earned. And, you have the trust that is not only between the two of yourselves, kind of elaborate on the trust that you guys have with each other, because that's, trust is hard.
Too far ahead. We still need Lyndsey's answer to this question.
Oh, well, that's true. Yeah.
Well, but I think the biggest challenge, and this is for both of us, but more for me, because I've got a little more track or history, if you will. It's not just trusting her, but it's getting rid of all of the old crap and all of the old programming that says, don't trust her, don't trust this person. This happened in the past. That's what this is. You know what I mean? And so
to the point where you can say, all my baggage fits comfortably in the overhead bin.
Yeah.
it's it's getting because when you go through those relationship challenges, or even not relationship, it can be friendship, just life experiences where people have let you down. You carry that protective box around that you're just not willing to let anyone else near your stuff ever again. And it is a journey to get people to trust yourself, to let you trust people again, to let people into your inner circle. And when you purely find that, that's where that real love sprouts. When you really know you can trust somebody with your entire being, and you are just 100% vulnerable and comfortable with that, because you know there is not an ill-willed bone in that person's body, there is no better feeling in the world. I agree with that wholeheartedly, and I would say the same about my fiance. It doesn't mean you have a perfect relationship. You have a perfect relationship for you. And I think that is the key difference. So, Lyndsey, I am curious to your answer to that, though. What was the thing that really cemented everything for you, knowing that, this was just the right thing? And I'm really, my life can't be any more complete than it is because of Jeff. Because we know he's that awesome already.
He is. Yeah, I've been trying to think of how to word this in a way that isn't super dark and mean, and this is in no way intended at any of the boys, but I think Jeffrey showed me that like men are not bad, and like they don't all come out of this, cookie cutter, like I'm gonna get home from work, I'm gonna throw my briefcase in your face, and like my dinner better be like hot and ready. Like he is incredibly loving and incredibly caring, and the way that he cares for me, the way that he cares for my mom, our niece and nephew, like it's something that I have like never seen before. And so just the love and compassion that he shows for me and my family, and his patience, just all of that is just like, wow. Like when I started to realize that he wasn't this like narrative that I had, created for myself just based on things that I had experienced before, that's when I was like, oh yeah, this guy's pretty awesome.
That's
I don't
awesome.
know. I'm going to make a joke here, but I'm somewhat serious. I don't know what was a better Valentine's, the one we had together on Friday night or the one we spent with your mom on Saturday afternoon.
That's when, again, that comfort is amazing. My fiance and I share 3 daughters between us that we've grown into a very strong family. And we have a 28-year-old, a 24-year-old, and my daughter who's 17 going on 92. And it's an interesting dynamic though, because Lyndsey, I totally get where you're coming from, because that is a hard-pressed stigma that's associated to men by the younger generation, especially right now. And we, Chuck, myself, and Jeff anyways, are in that age window where we were raised in a different generation. And like some of those old school values are strong. And if we can keep them generationally, they're a benefit to society. Like, there's a lot that's gotten lost across the journey, but there's some great qualities that we should take the time and learn from every generation. And I think that's a great thing. I'm curious, Mike wanted to ask you, are there any hobbies that you have gotten each other into that you didn't have before? Like, Lyndsey, I know you're a huge animal lover. I don't know your history, Jeff, with animals prior. I don't know if you're a big animal guy, but did Lyndsey invade your home with pets? Like, how did those? I know you have the cat, and so
we're working on more.
Okay, so is that your hobby then that you're bringing?
See, we're already hearing here. We're seeing Jeff saying, "Nope, no more dogs, no more cats." Yeah,
she will win. I will promise you.
Oh, I don't doubt that. So she wants to be a canine officer. By the way, the cat, like I told her, I've always wanted a gray cat, and I always wanted to name him Mr. Jones from the Counting Crows song in the 90s. And she found him, and he's ours, and he's amazing. So Lyndsey, growing up in Orange County, California, is a surfer, and she's gotten me into not surfing, but at least boogie boarding.
Yeah, there's also
The way to start.
like we both love to read, but that was always kind of like an independent thing that we did. But just recently we've started reading the Harry Potter books for the first time.
True.
And we're kind of like sharing that experience. So I guess that's a hobby that we didn't necessarily have, like one had it and the other didn't, but like that's something that we're sharing.
I can
want to
recommend
teach
also
people
the
to guitar.
podcast. Jim Dale as a podcast reader and listening to it together. Really, really cool. I can strongly recommend the audiobook version. Very,
Yeah.
Very
good.
cool.
That's cool.
Yes, it is. You know, and it's interesting because you kind of get into that of shared experiences and things like that as you're discovering new elements about each other. What's something that just this month we're celebrating Valentine's as we're recording this, it's February in the month of Valentine's. Just in this last month, what's something you've discovered about each other that you didn't even know?
Ooh.
Oh my. That's a
Didn't even know. Boy. Oh, we went to an entrepreneurial conference in Sarasota, Florida, and Lyndsey had never put her feet in the, I'm going to say, Gulf of Mexico, and seen the sunset there.
Yeah. Beautiful. That's one of the best places.
And she got to do it on her birthday, which was really cool.
And I was just going to point out, I know you did just celebrate a birthday and you had that amazing trip. So we did want to wish you happy birthday. I also know you guys are fairly tight on time and needed to kind of make sure we keep you on the 1 hour mark. And I want to respect that 100%. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of, give us a little plug. Where can we find your Instagram, your website? Where can we follow this new project you're on? And how can people sign up for your Wednesdays with Walt?
So the primary website is thewisdomofwalt.com, and then under resources, you'll see blog, and you can just throw in your email address. It's 100% free. You'll get it in your inbox every single Wednesday. And as far as Lyndsey and me, you'll get updates on the book project through the Wednesdays with Walt blog. But in terms of our YouTube channel, look up Jeff and Lyndsey Barnes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And so we want, again, just
you can't really see it, but I've got the little listen, your PDFs that come out, and they're amazing and great content for anyone. Don't feel just, if you're a Disney fan, that's great. But I work in an industry where I help people find work. I help people get jobs. Some of your lessons have been priceless for me to communicate and just show people, again, thinking outside the box, thinking a little differently, and how to learn from someone who saw such great success by using pioneering and unorthodox ideas. And I really appreciate you bringing that to light and life at so many levels, because you are a great keynote speaker. You are a great motivator. You are obviously a great teacher. You have taught people incredible lessons in life, and you've done great things. And we always love having you. You're one of my favorite people to interview. And I love it.
I'm going to go back to Megan here. Don't settle. Be disagreeable. Keep fighting for who you are and what you want.
I've always been disagreeable. That's certainly not a problem on my end.
Well, again, we want to just say a tremendous thanks to Jeff and to Lyndsey for joining us here on MouseKast. Again, as you heard, you can catch them on, sign up for their blogs, go over to thewisdomofwalt.com, and of course, check them out on YouTube. Again, a huge thank you to all of our cast who are with us tonight. Thank you to Mike, to Natalie, to Matt, to Megan, and Anne-Marie, all of us who have joined us tonight. You have been listening to MouseKast. This is the podcast where the mind meets the magic. And so until next time, we'll see you.
Great big thanks to Dr. Disneyland. To talk to you is always grand. Let's not forget his lovely wife for joining us to talk about life. While we hate the fact the show must end, we all can't wait to have you back again. The mind meets the magic in a unique and amazing form. And MouseKast is the podcast that thinks beyond the norm. This is where the mind meets the magic. Every path we tread brings tips and tricks, from theme park thrills to the open sea. MouseKast podcast keeps you company.